Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That Nerdy Site Show, weekly podcast where the team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me this week we have Cameron Abbott. How you doing, Cameron?
Hey, what's going on, Trevor? Sorry, I was
You
like,
were
I'm trying to
trying to
think. I'm
come
like,
up with like a line from the movie or something, and you realized, oh, this is a lot of dead air. Trevor's going to be mad, so I'm just going to do the
yep,
normal
yep. We
throw.
just we just gotta hit. Like, I didn't have it ready. Hit the ground running. Let's go.
Do you
Let's
want to
keep
come
going.
up with something and we can just restart from the top?
No. I'm good. I'm
All
good.
right.
We're good.
All right.
I think actually that pause and mess up is probably the most like Thor: Love and
Thor
Thunder
Love
thing
and
I
Thunder
could
thing.
have done. Yeah.
It would either be that or goats screaming, I imagine.
Nah. Yeah. It was. Yeah.
Yes, today we are going to be talking all about Thor Love and Thunder. This will, of course, be our standard spoiler cast. We typically do the kind of the week after, the weekend after these new Marvel movies come up. This is going to be an exciting one because Cam and I were unable to see this one together. So, like, this is going to be our first time really hearing each other's thoughts on the film. But we did both see it this last weekend. And so, yeah, stay tuned for that. As always, we will have a spoiler-free section kind of up top, and then we'll dive into full spoiler territory. I'll have the time codes and everything marked. Before we hop into that, a little bit of housekeeping. We did not have a show last week because I was at Disney, but you could go see some Disney themed Let's Plays. If you did not see those, I played Lego Indiana Jones and Epic Mickey 2 over thanks to the PlayStation Plus Premium stuff. And you can also continue the adventures of Friday Night Dying Light from Cameron. Cameron, how you doing with that one? How's that going?
It's going good. We're coming up on the end of the Let's Play. So,
Yeah.
which for me it means like it's like, oh, it's close to ending for me. For all of you, you have a minimum of like probably another like 10 episodes.
There you go.
So.
Yeah, this was episode 23, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Was this before or after? Remind me, because I know you've mentioned that there's a lost episode in there somewhere. Have we passed the lost episode at this point?
No, I believe if I am
that one's
not
still coming up.
mistaken, episode. Yeah, it is. It's still coming up. It's either episode 24, like the original 24 or 25.
Gotcha.
Is a lost episode.
Gotcha.
Let's look here.
So we'll just get
it
kind
looks
of
like
like
it's 20.
a recap.
The original episode 25 is the one that is messed up. So
Gotcha. Well, yeah. Stay tuned to that series every Friday evening, typically 6 p.m. Pacific time, as Cameron continues his playthrough of Friday Night Dying Light, a game that I have now played through and New Game Plus myself. So, because I'm a crazy person and was looking for games to play this summer. But yeah, other than that, if you like what you hear, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. So yeah, without further ado, Cam, spoiler free to start, what did you think of Thor Love and Thunder?
I'm just gonna put it out there. I loved it, but it is not as good as Thor Ragnarok.
Yeah.
I think
that's a general consensus, and that's pretty much where I fall on it as well. Like, I had a really good time with it, but the like newness that was Thor Ragnarok is gone, and so it's just like it's more Thor Ragnarok, but like that's not a surprise anymore. We kind of know what to expect a little bit more from Taika and the team.
Let me put it this way: before you and I walked into Thor Ragnarok, we were talking with all, because I was at an Extra Life. We were talking to all of our buddies there, and everybody kept talking about like, man, Thor: The Dark World was really bad. We just hope it's better than this one, or this one's better than that one. And we all walked in and had our minds blown by one of the best Marvel films of all time. And I think a big part of that has to do with the fact that it was that shock value of, oh, this is a completely different tone than they were doing before, where versus Thor, like the first Thor's like Shakespearean dramatic pulls, and Thor Dark World's very like sci-fi fantasy smashed together in a very borderline incoherent way. That's how I would kind of like talk about Thor: The Dark World, which, conceptually and on paper has like a lot of really great points. Just the execution of that film is just really, really bad. That being said, Thor Ragnarok's my personal favorite Marvel film. I don't want to say it's the best one because I think like Endgame and Infinity War together are probably like the two best Marvel films of all time, just because of the culmination and build up and then conclusion
Mhm.
of almost 20 years, like 20 plus years of cinema, or not 20 plus, but like more than a decade of cinema was dedicated towards making like Endgame happen. So there's that. So, but Thor Ragnarok is my favorite Marvel film. It is a like I don't think I've ever watched a film that I've laughed more at. I just that was a film that like I enjoyed so much, and I didn't think I was like, man, we all really enjoyed it, and everybody, you all looked at me and said nobody enjoyed anything as much as you've enjoyed that movie. And like it's true to this day. Like I can literally throw that movie on and just watch it and just enjoy and laugh at it. Like there was like it's to the point where like there are parts of Thor Ragnarok that like for a couple years, if I had started saying it or quoting it, I would just start breaking down laughing. The Loki snake story is still one of my favorite moments in any film that I've ever seen. And it's so good on so many like levels of everything. And Thor Love and Thunder I don't think has those breakout moments and a good reason is because I think I was looking for them. And those moments can't happen if you're looking for them. They just have to happen. And so I think the fact that this is Taika Waititi again. I think that it was a continuation of the same kind of like tone that we had before. Um, Kind of taken to like that next part of Thor's story, which was Thor learned to like he realized he can't save everything and he can't always solve the problems by being the hero. Sometimes he has to let things go the way they're going to go. And that's how Thor Ragnarok happened. Thor was on a journey to stop Ragnarok, and then to solve his problem, he had to let Ragnarok do its thing. And it lives on so many great moments of just like the universe is a powerful force that exists out there, and if you are willing to let go and not keep so much control, you can find like where your journey's going to be. And Thor is embracing that in this movie, and he's really living that kind of like the lessons that he's learned throughout from Ragnarok to the Infinity Crisis, and now to like what he's doing now. He's rebounded from like kind of where he was at in the Avengers films, and now he's kind of like back on his own 2 feet again, and it's been great, and it's good to see that progress and him living that progress. But I just think overall this film is still like really great. I think that it has enormous highs that, especially from the villain. I don't know if we've had a villain this good since Thanos. I really love Christian Bale's character, Gore. Um, it is truly a masterful performance, and nothing makes me feel more like sure of that than when somebody asked Christian Bale if he was excited to be part of the MCU. He asked them what the MCU is. Like
Mhm.
he's like he just like what a great way like what a great answer to that, because how many times have we heard people like just like absolutely make a dump on the MCU when they're more like hoity-toity like film people, and of somebody like Christian Bale who is like emphatically an actor. He's been an actor since he was a child. Like it's what he lives, eats, and breathes off of. For him to be like, I don't know what the MCU is, and honestly, like it doesn't matter. I'm just doing a Thor movie. Fantastic, and he really just brings it to this film in a way that I haven't seen him bring to a film in a very long time. So
Yeah, I mean, like my general spoiler-free thoughts are performances all around were really good.
oh yeah.
Um I think in a similar vein, like it doesn't reach the highs of Thor Ragnarok. It's still a fun experience, and I will say I've seen it twice. I went and saw it Thursday, and then I was just kind of bored last night and was like, you know what? In advance of our spoiler cast, I'll go see it a second time, kind of have it very fresh in my mind. Um, uh, and uh, I like again performances are great. It's great having Chris Hemsworth and Natalie Portman back together and their chemistry, which was one of the highlights of those early Thor movies. Even in their weaker aspects, like the two of them were great together. Um, Tessa Thompson's return is great, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Christian Bale is great. I think the problem for me, largely, or like one of my biggest criticisms, is that I think the movie leans so much into the humor that like
Mm-hmm.
the dire stakes that could be at play otherwise are significantly lessened,
Yeah.
and the emotional moments that could be at play otherwise are lessened because and Thor Ragnarok did this as well, but and it is admittedly one of my gripes with Thor Ragnarok is like, you know, Thor loses like everything in Thor Ragnarok. He loses his
Mm-hmm.
father, he loses the Warriors 3, he loses Asgard, and all of those are basically like undercut with jokes. Um and so like he never gets to like experience that like pain and grief, and he ends up experiencing it a little bit through the Infinity War movie and Endgame. I guess more so Endgame, where he goes into like the dude version of Thor and stuff. And this is
Well,
very
yeah,
much
he
like
is like,
Thor coming
yeah.
out of that, but still like when there are heavy emotional beats in this, Korg almost always is there to like undercut it with a joke. And while I can appreciate that even if the jokes land, it does end up like tonally feeling off, or sometimes I do want to like sit in that sadness for a little bit longer so
Mm-hmm.
I get like a broader spectrum of emotional catharsis from movies like this. And I think too often Taika's flavor is to just, throw a joke out there, like sometimes to specifically deflect from that. So I think
Which is
that,
wild because he directed Jojo Rabbit,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
like, well, I think also a part of it is, and this is my probably my biggest gripe with the film is its editing.
mm-hmm,
There is some significant drop off moments in editing that don't like transitionally are very hard to. I don't want to say buy into like how they're done,
mm-hmm,
but it's like for me this is not a poorly edited movie by any stretch of the imagination. I think actually, especially when it comes to like effects, this is a very impressive. But the scene transitions, especially in the early parts of the film, are very jarring.
mm-hmm, yeah,
And scenes that are established character moments to kind of show us where characters are then sometimes undercut by the next couple of scenes where that poignancy of that earlier scene is not being well played out, and
yeah,
instead it's being done for kind of the how do I put this? I don't want to spoil anything, so I won't give an example. But there is a part in early in the film with Jane Foster, Natalie Portman, where it feels like some of these scenes are a little bit out of order and were done to kind of compress her early part of the story to get her to that transition point, which is
mm-hmm,
fair because I could easily see somebody making the argument, well, they spent too much time doing that. They should have just compressed and got us to that part where we get the Jane that we want to see in the movie. But I actually feel it's weaker because of that. It's lacking in a similar vein of where, like, I will say there's a bit too much Korg in this movie.
mm-hmm.
Um, because he undercuts those poignant moments because it's like, oh, how are these characters dealing with that? And Korg just doesn't deal with anything because he's a rock person.
Yeah,
It,
yeah.
it's fine.
I think often emotional beats are sacrificed for a joke, and
Mm-hmm.
that's like sometimes just disappointing. Even if the joke lands, it's still like, did you need a joke there, or could we have had that moment between these two characters? Just like breathe a bit, and we can talk a little bit more about specific examples probably in some of the spoiler territory stuff. But yeah, I think like overall for me, good movie, fun movie. I enjoyed, and I was still laughing, the second time seeing
Mm-hmm.
it. Um, but it lost some of that luster and the newness of like Taika Waititi being, in just kind of getting to go Taika Waititi that we had with Thor Ragnarok. Um, and I think just tonally the different elements that they're trying to bring into the story just don't mesh as well as I would like. And so I think like, I think Jane's story gets a little bit short shrift. And I think the Gore story gets a little bit short shrift because of we're gonna just kind of bum rush joke kind of
Yeah.
stuff throughout. So like still overall a fun time. And for any MCU fans, I definitely, of course, recommend. And still easily the second best Thor movie, but yeah, just it doesn't reach the highs that Ragnarok had. Um,
And I think it's
yeah.
because also where Ragnarok was a action comedy, this one is trying to balance action, romance, and comedy
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in a way that like the other, like Thor Ragnarok was able to just kind of like be its thing with it being an action comedy movie. Being a romantic comedy action movie is a lot harder to thread that needle, and I don't, and like honestly, it just doesn't thread that needle sometimes.
Yeah.
So
Any final spoiler-free thoughts before we move into spoiler-filled territory there, Cam?
yeah, despite everything that Trevor and I have talked about in the last couple of minutes, watch this movie. It's absolutely fantastic. It's by far and away like a enjoyable movie. Like it's just like my suggestion is don't go in expecting Thor Ragnarok. Because I kind of went in expecting Thor Ragnarok, and it took me a minute or two after the movie started to kind of get over that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Cool. So yeah, diving full into spoiler full territory now. So this is your last chance to duck out. Feel free to circle back to this episode after you've seen it, if you have not yet. That's your last warning. Spoilers begin now. And I don't know if we'll actually, dive into a spoiler-filled thing first, but do you have any spoilery things that you want to dive into there, Cam?
Jane has cancer.
Yeah. It's such a weird, that's a weird like storyline thing, because like if you know her story and the story of the mighty Thor from the comics, like that is integral to that role and that version of the character. So like it was definitely something I was expecting was going to play out in this movie. And it's definitely one of those moments that I think does, like, the emotional weight of Jane having cancer is undercut a lot by the jokes and the Taika Waititi humor of it. But it's still like our introduction to her being, in a CAT scan machine and then getting chemo and stuff like that. It's like, oh yeah, this sucks.
I think this is where the for me in particular, this is where the kind of like disjointment comes in,
mm-hmm.
because we get two scenes of her in the hospital getting chemo and the CAT scan. We get the scenes of her in the lab doing like having her blood work tested and everything, and then like looking at like the mythology books, and then we get like that transition where she's gone to Asgard, and like the last, like all of that works, like it's fine the way that they do it. But man, some of those things could have been reorganized, and they could have been like given a moment to like breathe on their own. Because we're immediately thrown into something's wrong with Jane. She's in chemo. And then they went to, it turns out the chemo's not working. Oh, you know what might work? Space magic.
Yeah. And
yeah.
And then even that, like, even as rushed as that is, it's also like it's nice to have little cameos of like the old, science crew from the original Thors, since obviously all of them were dropped from Thor Ragnarok. So seeing like Darcy and the little Eric Selvig cameo kind of thing, those are nice little beats, and getting to see that crew a little bit back together. But yeah, then she does go to New Asgard, and like we see Mjolnir starting to do something with her, but then it cuts away, and like it cuts away in favor of that Thor joke later, where like he sees her for the first time and is flustered and thrown by that and stuff. And I think that's another area where the pacing of that and the decision to do that, and even when that happens, and then we go into like a Korg story of like what their relationship was to fill in some stuff that obviously the movies did not do. Like the pacing of all of that was like really rocky for me. And it felt like there were definitely scenes there. Like I would have loved to see Jane being Thor before Thor shows up, and meeting Valkyrie and the establishment of that friendship, as opposed to we get that a friendship has been established and she's been Thor for a minute by the time Hemsworth shows up, because they have like that little back and forth, and they have a friendship and a bond going there, Valkyrie and the mighty Thor. But like it's very much like a show me that, don't tell me that happened kind of experience. I think some of Jane's like arc ends up suffering a little bit because of
Mhm.
that, because we spent, a little bit more time with goats and Thor doing, splits, which again, like those also fun. The opening like fight scene that Thor has with the Guardians against like the bird people, very fun, epic, silly, a classic Thor adventure, as he says kind of at the end.
Mhm.
And a lot of like humor in that works, but I think like it works as like a fun little standalone bit, but I don't think it does anything to serve the greater story apart from giving us the briefest of setup of Star-Lord being like, man, sometimes you just need to feel shitty about things. That's going to
Mhm.
obviously come back in it. I mean, it's basically like Star-Lord saying it's better to have loved than lost and then to never have loved at all, but in his Star-Lord way.
Which is perfect because it's the way that a 14-year-old like from the 80s would think about something.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
It's also fun. Like there's a level of that where I'm like, oh man, like there was such excitement at the end of Endgame at the prospect of Thor and the Guardians going off on adventures
Yep.
together that I think also just gets drastically underserved. And like the
Well,
Guardians
I
are
think yeah.
barely in this, and they're like they probably all showed up for like one day of work. They have like one line a piece or whatever, and it's just like why are they like the promise of that premise that we're seemingly never going to get is disappointing.
Well, I think that also has to do with a lot with like Thor: Love and Thunder was supposed to come out after the third Guardian,
Was
wasn't
it?
it?
I don't think so.
I believe so because like third ones, people were like, it's going to be like as Guardians of the Galaxy because the Guardians movie
That's
was coming out
well,
first.
I mean, that was what like the joke and the thoughts had been, but I mean, it's been like there's been so much that has happened with Guardians of the Galaxy 3 with the like firing and then rehiring of James Gunn through all
Mm-hmm.
that and his, venture over into Suicide Squad. So like yeah, maybe that was another thing that suffered from like COVID shifts and stuff like that in the same vein as like the Multiverse of Madness and Spider-Man switch, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it is like ultimately it ends up just being like, well, that's disappointing. And maybe, there will be a part of Guardians 3 that is like, here are the adventures that they had before Thor Ragnarok or Thor Love and Thunder. But yeah, like that opening sequence, fun, but just kind of like I think it is indicative of some of my problems with this movie of like there's a lot of flash and a lot of flash there but very little substance going on underneath. Like it's fun in the moment, but I'm not going to be thinking about those sequences much, after the fact. um so yeah, that was a little disappointing, but I will say like opening with the gore sequence, like the pre-title sequence of kind of Gore and our introduction to him and like his plight and how he gets, his power and all that stuff. I thought that was like watching that I was like, oh, okay, like yeah, Christian Bale is bringing something like cool and fun to this.
Mm-hmm.
um and then like the next time we see him we just kind of get a flurry of like he's been doing a lot of god butchering. It's like, okay, but you could have shown us him doing a lot of
Yep.
god butchering. And so I think that even that's another like you've set up this premise that this guy kills gods and we see him kill his god and then we see like the aftermath of some god stuff, but like we don't see him butchering gods out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like like he's instead he's Gore the kidnapper for
Yeah, I
most of this
think
movie.
the biggest issue with that and what they should have done to like like not fall into that trap is they should have that big fight that Thor comes across the end of. That should have been like the fight that we see Gore owning, and because he's literally taking down a massive god monster.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, he's like fighting Sif. Like we could have gotten a really awesome fight scene. Instead, we got told, "Hey, an awesome fight happened," and
Yeah.
it's like, Taika, you are like the king of show don't tell. Show don't tell me.
Yeah. It's like
But,
I feel like I remember seeing this before the movie came out, and then I've seen a little bit more of it after, in part in some of like the criticisms and stuff. But the idea that like, there's a 4-hour cut of this movie out there somewhere. It's like, okay, well, I'm very interested to see like the other stuff that 4-hour cut had, if it had stuff that like could have better served this plot, because I think there is like a lot of just like, oh, it feels like a lot of cool stuff that could have benefited a lot of the characters in this movie got cut in favor of like quick clippy pacing, and I think Gore suffers because of that. I think like Christian Bale's like bringing a great sense of like menace to the character, and there is a good like justification for why this character hates gods, going off of the kind of the opening, of his daughter dying because the god is laughing and enjoying his almost Dionysian lifestyle or whatever, and only thinks that like men are there to like serve and die in honor of the gods, which we see also later repeated by kind of Zeus saying like, let's celebrate how many people had the most human sacrifices in their name.
Oh yeah, no, like massive shout out by the way to Thor being like, this is like hero worship, and us all being like, ugh, and then it being like, actually, let's go ahead and talk about how gods are problematic.
Yeah, that's and that's like a thing that if somebody other than Taika was dealing with this, I just don't think like Taika's interested in having these conversations. But like the idea that like Thor used to be one of those gods and has gone on a journey over the course of the last 12 years or whatever, to stop being a selfish playboy god and be out there, be an Avenger, be helping people, like. There could have been one of those, like, I've been where you are kind of moments with one of the other gods or with the Zeus or something like that. But really, we need to help these people. And the movie just kind of doesn't confront that reality. It just kind of like glosses over the fact that like, yeah, like like Zeus calls or Thor mentions to Jane, like, when I first met you, I wasn't worthy to hold Mjolnir. And that's the closest they get to like really confronting the growth that Thor has had over the course of his time in the MCU. And I think that because I think that could have become a very interesting conversation, especially, philosophically with Gore. And it could have been like, hey, your quarrel isn't really with all gods. Some of us are out there trying to help people. And it sucks that like this one fucked you over. That's terrible. I'm really sorry. But yeah, it just isn't interested in having those like deeper theological conversations, in favor of like, let's make jokes about an orgy and have Russell Crowe run around in a short toga-esque skirt kind of thing. And let's have goats scream a lot.
Hey, I will stand by the goat screams. Those were hilarious every time.
For me, they very much did the like classic, like it's funny, it's not funny, but they keep doing it long enough that it comes back around to being funny. In particular, like the goats crashing into the Shadow Realm planet was like perfect. I can't argue with that comedic beat. That's a good beat.
They just slam right into it, and then it shows you from like the top down as like the boat like comes crashing down. And you're sure,
yeah,
it does it, and it's like it's perfect. It's literally perfect. Those goats are perfect. Also, the fact that they pull it, my brother-in-law was super tickled by this, but they pulled in the fact that like, Thor had like in mythology, Thor has a boat that's like he has two goats that like run out in front of it, and create like a little like and like he rides the sky on these magic goats, like while he's standing in like a ship, like on a chariot type thing, but it's an actual like ship.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is perfect. The fact that they actually brought this in, it reminded me a lot of how they creatively did the Rainbow Bridge.
The Bifrost,
and the Bifrost in part 1 or in Thor 1. Like, because everybody's like, man, I do not know what they're gonna do for this stupid rainbow colored bridge that has just been a rainbow in every single medium. And for Kenneth Branagh to have the idea, let's make it like a crystal that reflects all the colors and everything like that. And then the Bifrost itself is like the actual energy of it is like rainbow colored as it comes down. It's excellent. It's absolutely perfect. And so we got to see a little bit of that again with Thor's bow.
Yeah.
It's just great, man. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Even that's like I think there was a cool potential opportunity there that would have been like the fact that the goats are like, yes, are instinctively and inherently tied to Thor in mythology as well as Thor in the MCU or in Marvel comics. But they are like of Asgard. And so the fact that here they're just given as like a random boon from like some other planet and some other people is like, well, that's like it could have been cooler if even like just one line in there of like, we have these Asgardian goats. We're sorry for the loss of your peoples, but here is a reward as a thank you. And if it had been like, Thor excited because these goats are, a tie to his past and a tie to Asgard.
Yeah, if they were like, hey, we have these two powerful goats that have been roaming around our planet for years, and he was like, oh my gosh, and named them, like name dropped them, and then being like, I can't believe it. These are like two of my friends, like from Asgard.
Yeah.
This is where you guys have been.
But instead it's just like, we're just going to do the screaming goat meme time and time and time again. He's just going to be very excited to have goats. And Korg's also going to be very excited to have goats.
The Guardians not being excited about goats was pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, like for as little as the Guardians are there, I like what they, bring to the table. I like in that opening sequence, like when Thor does show up and starts just like wrecking shop. I love Drax just being out there with his like rocket launcher, just being like, this guy again. And I love like Nebula just constantly being pissed off at Thor. I love, in the send off, Thor being like, take this ship, and Star-Lord being like, you're giving me my ship. Thanks. Great. Sounds good.
It's great to see that like Peter Quill Star-Lord has like figured out like how to deal with Thor though.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like, because when they first were trying to deal with each other, it wasn't good.
Yeah.
But then like at this point now it's just like, yep, okay. It's interesting because Peter Quill's finally, it's like for the first time, I am the smarter guy in the room. And you're like, yep, I know how to play this. Let's go.
Yeah. So eventually, Gore does come attack New Asgard, steals the kids away. I'm not
gonna lie, dude. When he's like, because it's the Gore the God Butcher, I 100% expected him to be going through like each kid's room through the night and just butchering.
Yeah, like that's like the premise of this movie is like way darker than what we actually get. Instead, he just kidnaps a bunch of kids for no real reason apart from
he does it. It's like why did he?
Yeah, they explain it away as like, oh, he's doing it to lure Thor because he needs the Bifrost. But it's like, okay, but did he like? Is that really why he did it? Because he was very ready to kill Thor there, like when he had him before Mighty Thor and Valkyrie.
I feel like
to defend.
I feel like the kidnapping was like a backup plan, because his primary plan, it looked like, was Thor's here, let's kill Thor, get the axe for it.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't able to kill Thor, realizes he's outnumbered because there's two Thors and Valkyrie and all the Asgardians that are there. So he decides to go to plan B, which is like get away and use the shadow creatures to kidnap children, knowing that he is going to lead Thor to where he wants Thor to go.
Yeah.
And it works.
Yeah. I mean, like, it ultimately it works because the script lets it work, but I think there's like, for me it was a like, especially like watching a second time, is like, okay, but like this wasn't his MO with anybody else, or like why is he suddenly now going like what, like we don't get to see enough from Gore's perspective, so we don't get to see Gore learning that he needs the Bifrost to get to Eternity or whatever. Like that gets unveiled later, but yeah, it's like he's been going around killing gods, so why does he suddenly now not kill this god or try to kill these gods or what? Like it'll be like in the pitch meeting YouTube video, like, well, we needed the movie to happen. That's why he doesn't kill Thor here.
Yeah. I think it would have been interesting if they once again, if they had showed when he killed the gods, if each god kill was like a communion with the necro sword. Mm-hmm. If like each time he like killed a god, if he like not necessarily grew in power,
Yeah.
but rather he gained more insight into what he needed to end all gods.
There is an element there, and it's something I definitely caught more the second time around, because when he first gets the sword, the Necro
Everything
sword,
gets like
he
flashes
gets
in front of
flashes and visions that like are, oh, you need the Bifrost to open the gates of eternity. So like he's told all that, but it's very much like in a, like, if you don't know the movie, it's just like random glimpses of stuff. So yeah, I guess like that's another thing that like it's a leap of logic we're having to make, that he's somehow getting more information, or that image is becoming clearer each time he's killing somebody,
Well,
or something like that.
I'm
And
not making that leap. I'm
Yeah.
saying that's what they should have showed us.
yes, yeah,
Which you could have showed us in the big monster god badass fight where
Yeah.
he kills that god and like wounds Sif, and it's like he's going, like maybe they do this awesome moment where he kills that god and then Sif is like comes to attack him, and he realizes through like the communion that he just had, oh, I can't kill Sif. Sif will, like, Thor will come to Sif, and Sif will go and like he'll take Sif to Asgard, and that's my moment to go get the Stormbreaker axe.
Mm-hmm.
See, things like that could have been cool. Instead, we're given a weird like information dump at eternity. Like, first off, for it being like eternity is where he's after, and then like eternity, what is it, Eternal City or whatever it is,
Omnipotent City.
Too many eternity, omnipotent things being pushed together in such a small amount of space. Where when he said he'll never reach eternity, I was like, wait, is this place called Eternity?
Mm.
Because he's coming for all the gods? And it's like, no, he's looking for eternity. It's something else. I'm like, okay, then what? Like, partially, like, if we just needed it, Thor's like, we're here to get an army of gods. And instead, if it'd been like Zeus had come up to him and been like, hey, Thor, you don't actually need an army of gods. He's not coming after all the gods. He's trying to make his way to eternity. Well, also, how does Zeus know that he's trying to make his way to eternity? That's never explained.
Yeah,
there's a massive plot hole.
Yeah, there's a lot of those. Like, we just need to get you and the audience to the next place. But circling back to New Asgard, I do want to give a shout out to the like tourist trap nature of the city that it has become. I liked that, obviously, like, Valkyrie, ends the last movie as King of Asgard kind of thing, and was King of Asgard in Endgame. And so I like that, like, she, like, that's not the life she wants to lead. So she's out there doing Old Spice commercials and cutting ribbons and stuff like that for infinity cones. But I also, shout out to her Phantom of the Opera sweatshirt that she shows up to battle. She rides into battle in. And shout out to also the silly actors making their return alongside the addition of Melissa McCarthy as Hela.
Yes. Oh my God, yes. That was the freaking best.
Mm-hmm.
That was the freaking best. Because I'm like, what do they have for Hela? Because, like, I'm not going to lie, Hela's hella hot in Thor Ragnarok.
Mm-hmm.
Like, absolute, like, evil babe magnet, right? Or evil babe right there. Just like, gosh. But to the point, though, it's like, I'm like, who did they get to do it? And then they bust out Melissa McCarthy, and I lost it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, that actually, you know what? I was wrong. There is a great Thor Ragnarok like moment, and it's Melissa McCarthy busting out as Hela.
Also, shout out, especially because you and I did the all the one shots. Shout out to Daryl being made canon as a tourist guide there in New Asgard.
Yes,
Daryl, formerly Thor's and the Grandmaster's roommate in the like the Thor one shots that were very clearly could not be canon because of, they have like Thor and Bruce Banner meeting up like on Earth instead of out in Sakaar or whatever. But it was fun to see him pop up. I didn't catch him until like a second viewing where I was like, oh yeah, it's that guy.
I caught him in the first one because
Nice.
I was like, immediately I was like, well, she even calls him out. She goes, like Daryl.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and when she said that, I was like, it is Daryl.
Well,
they did make him canon.
Yeah.
And it's great. And for part of that's great for me though. It's because also, it's like, well, what was Thor doing hanging out on Earth? It's like, well, that's his time of his relationship with Jane Foster.
Mm-hmm. There is like, he's in there twice. He's the tourist. He's the tour guide there showing off Mjolnir when Jane Foster is looking at him. And then, he's also he's name dropped in the like town hall in the same scene that Matt Damon's out there being like, let's create a play from this. Open night children's bedroom, like that, like the
So
absurdity
perfect.
of the
Just
actors
so
needing to make this all about them. Yes, lots of fun in those sequences. The runner of Mjolnir versus Stormbreaker, and like Stormbreaker
oh
just like slowly creeping into frame as like a jealous ex-girl or a jealous girlfriend or something like that, was a lot of like that one always worked for me. That was like, that's always fun.
perfect. Perfect.
Um
Yeah.
uh
When Stormbreaker, when he goes like ends repairing his relationship, he goes, "No, I think it's time. I think it's time for us to be."
yeah.
And it's like, what the hell?
Yeah. Or like even when he's out there like talking about how great the Thunderbolt is, and like Thor
Mm-hmm.
or Stormbreaker like crackles. He's like, for you, Valkyrie, it's great for you. I don't I and that's what like prompts him to go have the beer. Um, what did you think of like the little like flashback montage of what Thor and Jane's relationship had been, and what led to their eventual breakup?
If I'm being honest, it does give a different side of Jane that you kind of need to know about before you kind of get her as Mighty Thor, because we see that Jane is super serious about her research,
Mm-hmm.
and she's only serious, like she's dedicated to her research, but we don't get to see kind of like a more um kind of like what is Jane like if she's not needing to go to her lab? What's Jane like as like regular Jane Foster, not Dr. Jane Foster, astrophysicist, but just Jane Foster, Thor's girlfriend? Like, what does that look like? And for me, it was she's like she just is all in on the silly him on his silly himbo-ness.
Mm-hmm.
She's just all in on just having fun and enjoying a life together. Like, to me, that's what matters, and that's why that scene mattered. I don't think it was particularly done like super well, like
Mm-hmm.
as in, like an introduction to it, but it also kind of the what it did for me was it got me a sign of Jane, so that when Jane as like excited Mighty Thor Jane did not feel as disparate as like Dr. Jane Foster from Thor the Dark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like it for me, it tries to bridge that gap. I don't think it successfully does. Like Jane is a lot of fun in this, but if I think for a second, this is not at all the Jane that we saw in Thor and Thor the Dark World. Like, this is the Taika Waititi version of Jane Foster. It's like, that's fun, but it's zero consistency for the character, and even with that like trying to bridge the gap kind of thing, doesn't really do a good job of getting us from point A to point B, in part because it's just done through montage and with Korg voiceover.
If there had been moments where instead of it being just like super awkward at some points, what would have been really great is if Taika had them basically be like, oh, like, so yeah, like, what's your like, like what do you think you're like, what do you find yourself doing, like, or like, oh hey, like, you're looking great, like, what have you been eating? And it would have been hilarious if Thor would have been like lots of flapjacks, like, or lots of pan flats.
Mm-hmm. Or even
uh
like, especially with as much of a runner as Jane trying to come up with like a catchphrase is, like, give me a scene between Thor and Jane during their relationship where she's getting excited about Thor coming up with catchphrases or something like that.
mhm.
Let that be
or
established.
or she's trying to get Thor to get into coming up with a catchphrase, and Thor being like, why would I have a catchphrase? I just hit things with my hammer.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, but you could just do something. And he goes, I guess I could say hammer time. And she goes, no, that's played out. Don't use that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just some kind of setup for that to be the runner for this, as opposed to just it coming out of nowhere and being like, this doesn't really feel like Jane. It's funny and it's fun because it's Natalie Portman being very excited to be a superhero, but it's also like, but why? And also like, do any of her catchphrases really like warrant it to be as like steady a thread as it is? Because there's also this element of like, we don't, time is condensed in this movie such that like we don't know how long she's been the Mighty Thor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we see the beginning of it, but we don't know how much time goes between that and when we see her in battle.
We know Gore is her first big bad guy.
Yeah,
we know that, but that's it. We don't have anything else.
Yeah, but like, she clearly had been helping people long enough for Valkyrie and her to have, and for Valkyrie to say like she's really good at the helping people thing, not so great with the catchphrase thing kind of thing. So like there's just kind of this weird inconsistency in terms of like that setup, and I think part of that is like maybe that was lost to the cutting room floor, or maybe it was just like, hey, we're not really actually too concerned about that. Let's just kind of like get on to the next joke, get on to the next sequence for stuff.
Yeah.
I will say this is where we start getting introduced to the runner of, I guess we had it in the initial site. I will say for music wise, I'm not like a Guns N' Roses, fan or anything like that. So a lot of like some of the songs I'm like, okay, I get that. But like there were also like some sequences where I'm like, I don't like, this does not feel like a hype song for the action that is
I
happening
see.
here. In particular, I will shout out like I love the visuals and I love the absurdity of the kids fight at the end. But I've now watched the movie twice, and like I have no idea what song this is they're fighting along to, and like it could be that epic like Led Zeppelin moment from the end of Thor Ragnarok, and instead it's like I'm seeing really cool and funny visuals that are being completely undercut by what seems like a very quiet and like dour and slow paced song sequence at the end. Versus like the opening, fight scene is fun as Thor's out there doing split kicks and roundhouse kicking a tank and doing all that stuff to one of the Guns N' Roses song I do know. But yeah, like my relationship with the soundtrack on this one was much more hit or miss. But I do appreciate that we meet a sudden Heimdall son, and Heimdall's son loves GNR so much that he's renamed himself Axel,
Which is fantastic. He goes, Astrid, your father gave you a strong Viking name. He goes, call me Axel. And it's like, first off, great teenage moment.
I mean, I would have preferred if he'd gone by Slash, but whatever. Just because I think Axl Rose is kind of a douche from everything I understand of the man.
You are not wrong.
Yeah.
Axl Rose is an absolute dickbag.
Yeah.
100%.
But I will say like and I almost wish this hadn't been given away in the marketing and I hadn't seen it so many times. I love how Jane fights with Mjolnir and how it splits apart and can turn into basically like a projectile AoE weapon attack kind of thing, and then everything comes back to her. Like it gets used in a lot of fun and interesting ways throughout that first New Asgard fight, and then also in Omnipotent City. She's using a lot of fun there. What did you think of the Omnipotent City sequence? I know you were a little thrown and confused by some of the naming stuff there, but apart from that,
I really enjoyed it. As far as like kind of like the stuff going on in it, it felt cool. It felt like there was a lot of like I like the idea, like we kind of got a taste. It's like, well, gods exist, but like where do they exist if they're not like on Earth or watching over us, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like turns out they're just like being debauched in like being totally debauching in a like city. Mm-hmm. It's like it's great.
Shout out to Korg's rock god sitting on a Game of Thrones style throne of scissors. I appreciated that as like that's probably one of my like favorite just subtle like sight gags in the film. I don't know if you caught that, but it is seeing it the second time, especially I chuckled a little bit more. I was like, even the like the I flick off your disguise, you flick too hard, damn it. Like that's another thing like I wish hadn't been given away, because I think it like undercuts a little bit of it when we see it in the film, but it's still
that's what I thought. I was like, so the song that you're talking about with the kids is November Rain by Guns N' Roses. It's Guns N' Roses.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I know the name November Rain, but like there was no point in hearing that song in the movie where I was like, this is an epic song that like meets this moment, especially because I'm pretty sure like November Rain I feel like is more of like a rock ballad, And so I was like, yeah, I think like I knew going in the second time, I think I knew it was November Rain, but I still was like listening to it and just being like, this just doesn't fit for me. I don't like this. It doesn't vibe with me in that sequence. But yeah, I loved Thor and Thor having that.
November Rain is not a ballad.
Is it not? Okay.
No, I was like, I don't think it is, and I had to like re-listen to it just now.
Okay.
I can't confirm for a fact it is not a ballad. However, it is not as iconic as Led Zeppelin. Like when it's like I come from the land of ice. Like the epicness, like the epicness of Led Zeppelin. Like Guns N' Roses is awesome. I love a lot of the placement of Guns N' Roses. I would not have played November Rain in that moment.
Yeah.
I don't think November Rain is the right song choice for that. But then again, also, like, I don't know what is the right song choice. Yeah. I will say, however, it was super kick-ass when he goes, like, if they be worthy, give them temporarily the power of Thor.
For limited time only, the power of Thor, yes. Back in Omnipotent City, I love the beat of Thor, like, meeting his hero. And like that, you know, he's the god of lightning, I'm the god of thunder. I've really designed a lot of my vibe around him. And the like that meeting your heroes moment and the disappointment of that. And Thor realizing that Zeus sucks. To the point that he throws his thunderbolt back and we think kills Zeus in that moment. I was like, whoop. At the same time, like, this is also the first place I think where the movie like it could have had like a strong like emotional beat when we think Korg is dead, but no, Korg's not really dead. Now he's just going to be he's just now going to be a mask for a little while. That's going to have weird like lip syncing stuff that also does not work for me later on the boat. And then same with Valkyrie later on when like she gets stabbed. It's like, if either of those had like been actually like a permanent kind of thing, I would have felt like, okay, now there are stakes in this movie, and now there is like, especially because like with Valkyrie, it almost felt like, where do you take Valkyrie as a character? Let her die in battle. She clearly doesn't like just being, you know, back at home or whatever. So it seemed like it would be a fitting place to kill her off, as much as I would not want to see Tessa Thompson go. But it just like, this was the first point of this where I'm like, oh, I'm guessing everybody's really going to come out of this, you know, safe. Even Jane Foster at the end, when she, you know, fades into stardust at like post-credit scene, comes back in Valhalla, so she's still out there at play, as is Idris Elba, and presumably, you know, anybody else that they want to bring back if they need.
Everybody in Asgard died a hero's death to Hela. Like Hela literally sent them all to Valhalla. So
yeah,
like it works. Like it on a flip side, on a fun side, does that mean we get like, is this Taika saying, hey, sure, let's bring back everybody I killed in Thor Ragnarok that we ended a lot of actors' careers when we did that.
Yeah, we'll see. Similar to that, since we're also here in Omnipotent City, like even Zeus not being dead in the mid-credit sequence, I was like, all right, that also feels like a weird cop-out, because we saw the thunderbolt go straight through his chest and him fall. Like, how did, like, the fact that that's not explained at all as to like how did he survive or whatever.
Well, he even shows he has he's like
got the puncture that he's like still like, you know, nursing effectively.
Yeah, and I think if you're a god of like Zeus's stature, especially if he's like, if Thor basically all but called him basically the king of the gods, like that makes sense. Although it did give us the awesome moment of the reveal of Hercules.
Yeah, Hercules at like Brett Goldstein, aka Roy Kent from Ted Lasso as Hercules, is like
iconic.
That was such a I saw that and I was like, holy shit, that's cool. Good for him.
That's so great. That's so great for him.
Not at all who I would have thought in the role of Hercules or anything like that. But especially like looking at it a second time, seeing like he looks good. Like he looks like he's getting the Marvel fit on that. But yeah, shout out to him.
And also massive shout out also for the choice of just being like, no, we're gonna give him the comic book accurate Hercules outfit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I was very impressed by that.
And so, yeah, all of that setting up that, you know, presumably there is going to be a Thor 5, with, you know, Thor versus Hercules. Presumably they'll, team up against Zeus by the end or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, shout out to Brett Goldstein getting that cool opportunity and continuing this weird, like, hey, we're going to introduce potentially big characters just in a mid-credit sequence at the end of the film. You have what's his butt for Harry Styles being introduced in Eternals. You had Clea, Charlize Theron in Doctor Strange, and now Hercules, Brett Goldstein playing Hercules. And going to be very interesting, like where all of these threads start paying off.
Phase 4 has been weird, man. Phase 4 has been so weird. But granted, we're not like, it's obvious Phase 4 is not setting us up for another kind of end of Phase 3, like big Thanos like arc thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's my feeling. It's like they are trying to basically be like, do not expect us to do a repeat, which is funny because it's off of Marvel Comics, and this is all Marvel does with their comic book properties, is they do the same freaking stories over and over again, leads up to the big final like crossover event, and then reset, and like the cycle continues.
Yeah.
It's why I stopped reading Marvel Comics on a regular basis, because it's just like, it's not interesting when I've seen the same stories done 12 different ways.
Yeah. But
yeah,
Phase 4 has especially been interesting because it has been the first phase that is like the mix of shows and movies, since like the Netflix stuff never really felt integrated into the larger scheme of things.
We found out why too. Kevin Feige never liked the idea that they were on.
Yeah, he didn't.
Kevin Feige never liked that it was outside of his sphere.
Yeah,
it's the same reason he didn't like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
His stuff with like Perlmutter or whatever. But yeah, it's like, because it's also the realization of like, if you factor in all of the series and stuff, Phase 4 is probably easily like the longest like per minute, phase of Marvel so far. But it also feels like nothing's happened really. Like it feels like there's just been a bunch of like standalone things, and yeah, it just feels like there hasn't been significant crossover that even like, even going back to that like Phase 1, like having Hawkeye show up in Thor
I think it's because we have not yet had an Avengers style movie to cap the phase.
Yeah.
Phase 4 feels disjointed, but then again, if you look back at it, like it's more conjoined and understandable and cohesive compared to the, like when Marvel was doing it independent before they got bought by Disney, when it was just Marvel. Like I think Thor was the first one we got that was produced by Disney.
I feel like it didn't happen until after Avengers.
No, it was before Avengers. It was definitely before Avengers, because I remember thinking like we had found out that they had bought it. I think maybe Iron Man 2 was like the last one. Because I remember talking to somebody, and like while talking to somebody, they're like, "Yeah, I can't believe they're making." I was like, "I can't believe they're making a Thor movie," because I'm like, nobody outside of like people who follow comics like would guess they do a Thor movie, and like Thor's not relevant outside of the comic books and stuff. Because he's literally like a god. He's literally a deity.
Yeah.
And so how are they going to bring that in and incorporate that with like Tony Stark, a dude in an iron suit or a metal suit? Like, how does that work? And it gets done well. So
I looked it up. The Disney acquired Marvel in 2009. So theoretically, any of the 2010 movies were probably already in production, which I think would have been Iron Man 2, might have been Captain America, might have been Thor. Because at that point we really would have only had Iron Man 1 and Incredible Hulk, because then there was like that couple year gap before the rest of Phase 1 really started kicking off. So yeah. It's all weird. Like I remember when we were doing our Multiverse of Madness chat for that D Plus show recently, and realizing that the Inhumans was only 5 years ago and just feels like a lifetime ago is so much weirder as well. Anyway, back to Thor: Love and Thunder. The fight scene in Omnipotency is another like fun sequence, even as it is like like there are moments where I'm like, oh, that gets undercut a little bit with like Korg not like dying, but not really dying, and then being tied to Valkyrie's like head, and then we get that weird like the camera angle shot of just like moving with Valkyrie,
I didn't care for that
and
shot.
keeping on Korg's face or whatever as he's whistling for the goats. Yeah. Um. But still, like I love the like, and we didn't spend a significant time with them, but like as they're just like cleaning up and taking out all these like theoretically other gods, or at least like the soldiers of the gods, like just like blood splatter everywhere, but it's like gold, because apparently the gods bleed gold. And I love that, like especially on a second viewing, I love that like gold smears are just like on Thor, as that sequence comes to a close. But yeah, trying to think where we go next. I think then we just go probably to the Shadow Realm or something. Yeah. Well, we get the nice little sequence on the boat where Thor and Jane kind of come clean about their feelings for each other, and Jane comes clean about her cancer, and even that like is an emotional scene, but I think was just kind of undercut when we cut back to Korg singing about lava stuff, and I was like, I don't I agree kind of with your sentiment earlier, like this movie has a little too much Korg. As much as I like Korg and I like Taika Waititi, I did not need him as much in this movie. I think he could be used in very fun ways, and in particular, like I like, and this isn't like I heard this in somebody else's review, but the idea of Korg effectively being like the bard telling the tale of Thor's adventures is a cool element, because it adds to the mythos and the grandeur of Thor, as opposed to if we just see those aspects. The fact that like somebody else is telling these tales adds to that in the respect of a bard. Like I think there's an element there of fun, but him being out there and just kind of always throwing that extra little quip in where it's like a lot of times not necessarily needed. I could have done without that, in favor of just kind of Thor and Jane having their moments on that boat, because I really enjoyed that. And like them having to confront what it means that Jane has cancer, and what that's going to do. I love the aesthetic of the Shadow Realm with like all the color being drained out, everything. Good. Really, really cool there. Even that, like, even the fight sequence there, which I know Tim referred to this as Mario Galaxy as well, and that's like the first thing I thought of when they crash on that planet. I was like, oh, it's like a Mario Galaxy planet where it's like small enough that they're just running around this thing. That's neat. Just because like that's one of those things we haven't seen done in the MCU before. So that was a fun little element of it. And I liked that, like, in that fight you had Valkyrie and the mighty Thor fighting shadow things as Thor's fighting Gore, and then like eventually those fights all start coming together. We get the fake out of Valkyrie's death, and they skedaddle out of there. And Gore gets the Bifrost, or gets Stormbreaker / the Bifrost. And then like, yeah, I love the emotional beat up back in the hospital of Jane, like Mjolnir is killing her, and Thor having to confront her with that. And
basically being like, listen, you need to stay here because we have a future together. Where like, even if this is the path we go down and you do like I do lose you, I can't lose you now. Like you need I want to give us
a chance, and if you pick up that hammer, that chance goes out the window.
It was such a great moment for like, oh, Thor, like it's easy to say, yeah, Thor's grown. It's like, this is Thor being extraordinarily vulnerable in a way he has never been really before, and it's only because he loves Jane so much that his vulnerability is there, and he's just giving it to her and showing her, because that's also part of the convincing her is like, I'm telling you all of this right now because I can't handle not being able to see you again. And if you take that hammer, that's what's going to happen, and you're throwing it away. Like, you're throwing away our future. I will handle this. And he does his best, but
And which, like, with all of that, like, charge going into that fight, when Jane shows up in that final fight and they share that look together, at like both knowing what it means that she's there, it is like that just extra bit of like gut wrenching of like, well, dang it, this sucks. And so from that point on, I just keep wishing that Thor is going to make it into the the gates of eternity to make the wish and make a wish that Jane will be okay. And so I appreciated that they didn't end up going that route. But yeah, here we get the fun sequence of Thor basically enlisting the child army. And that is, again, like, visually incredibly cool. November Rain does nothing to add to that scene for me, and just and continually undercuts it. That's one, like, I don't often like when fans are like just shitty and like do the edits, but like when fans did that edit of like Infinity War of Thor coming through on Stormbreaker and like editing that to the Led Zeppelin soundtrack, I was like, yeah, go ahead and just give me that song instead of and obviously, like, I know you couldn't repeat that beat or whatever, but something just more epic than November Rain would have very much worked for me. But then we get the Gore going off, and I will say, like, the moment where like Thor is like, go ahead, make your wish. I'm like, if I have moments left, I'm going to spend them with her. Why would I spend them with you? Like, like, I loved that moment, and like Gore's initial indignance of like, how dare you turn your back on me, and Thor basically just saying like, no, like, I choose love. I'm gonna spend my final moments with her. If you're going to make your wish and kill us all, then I don't want my last minutes to be wasted on you. And I love that, like, that ends up kind of making the turn for him. And
well, it's interesting because so they break the Necro Sword. Which also,
yeah,
I want to give a massive shout out to the Necro Sword. It is by far one of my favorite weapons I've ever seen in movies, or in anything. It's such a sleek, simple design, but the way Christian Bale uses it is, I part of it, me loves it, is because it's very clear Christian Bale's Gore is not a soldier. He's not a warrior. He's a priest. He's a cleric. He is somebody who,
very much like, I was like, oh god, he's just like a monk. He's just like a sad monk man.
He's a sad monk man with a dead daughter. Like, that's it. But that's what makes it so good when he has the sword and he's fighting, and Thor's fighting him the way Thor would fight any opponent. But he's not a fighter. He's not a warrior. He's not somebody who does that, which means he's going to take every opportunity to try to sneak up behind Thor. He's going to use fake outs. He's going to use everything he can to just jack Thor up. And it's done so well in all three of the major fight scenes that Gore has. It's just done so well, and I really, really enjoy it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. The way he uses shadows to his advantage. And yeah, I like, even when the sword shatter, this is another thing, like, I've watched it twice, and like, I'm pretty sure I understand what's going on, but like the sword shatters and then like gets like sucked back into Mjolnir as it reforms, and then starts to, like, the Necro Sword starts to reform in Gore's hand. So it gave me the impression that, like, oh, like, those powers have like intertwined or something. So if Jane doesn't like do something with Mjolnir, the Necro Sword is going to be like restored. And so like she uses basically the last of her strength to like destroy the sword with Mjolnir. But even that was like the stakes of what's happening in that moment are a little unclear.
I've only seen it once. I picked it up pretty clearly, but I was not like, when Thor and her both looked at each other before she did that move, it kind of told me they both kind of like communicated to each other, like, the only thing to do is to use the hammer's power to like destroy the shards that are inside of the hammer. And she does that, but that's the last of her strength.
Yeah. Okay.
And so one of the things I loved was I totally thought they were going to play it off as you said you really enjoyed it. That like, yeah, Thor didn't get to eternity first. I thought Gore was gonna turn around and just be like, all right, I'll give your love a chance or whatever, and like like bring Jane back or like keep her healthy or whatever. And they didn't go that route, which surprised me. And it's like, and before it was like, well, yeah, if he's under the Necrosword, the Necrosword's corruption, he's going to choose to kill all the gods because that's his vengeance, that's his revenge.
Yeah.
But he literally has a impossible to make immediately granted wish. And if he has been restored and love has been brought back to his heart by Thor's speech about, I'm not going, like, I don't care about your revenge. I don't care about, like, your reasons. I'm going to spend the last of my moments with somebody I love. And for that to affect him so much that he chooses to bring back his daughter instead.
Yeah, and Thor, like, even says that, like, but like, you don't want hate, you want love. It's what we all want. Like, bring her back. You can make that your wish, is kind of like the challenge he almost throws down there. And to which Gore, accurately like identifies, well, I'm gonna die, so like if I do bring her back, I bring her back to with no one. And so I appreciated that,
Jane,
like,
and then Jane says she won't be alone, and she looks at Thor.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. It's like all three of them kind of made like a silent promise that
Yeah. But even
in
that,
exchange, in exchange for not killing all the gods, like you get your daughter brought back to life.
I'll take care of her. I'll
like,
be the dad that has been like vaguely hinted at in this movie and this movie alone. That he has an interest in being a father or something like that. Which is another like element of like, if that had been seeded a little bit more, that would have been cool. But instead, like in this movie, we get like in that montage, like a glimpse of him looking at like a baby carriage or something like that, and then
it's just a baby in a stroller,
a
and
throwaway
like,
line from Korg being like, "Oh, I think Thor would make a great dad." But then we get like the fun sequence of them to rap, and I appreciated that, like, that's how they tie the name around to Love and Thunder. That's basically like those are their code names or whatever. And I love the extra like little just meta-ness of that being his real life daughter, I believe. So shout out to the Hemsworth family affair. Because I think his son is also like one of the young versions of Thor. Obviously, you have Luke Hemsworth playing actor Thor. So and I read this as well. When they do like the little montage of like Thor's past loves, the wolf lady that he is with on a lady wolf. The wolf lady is Hemsworth's real life.
Is she? Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. So shout out to all that, and then just the like the fun little sequence there at the end of the girl with these like impossible god powers or whatever, throwing a little tantrum at Thor and not wanting flapjacks or whatever, flapcakes, pan flaps, is what they call it. But she's also, decorated Mjolnir, and like Thor's like, no, you're right, it looks great. That's never coming off. Her running out with Stormbreaker and him, getting Mjolnir back as his weapon. Like, I'm definitely interested in like their future adventures, but I'm also like, are they really gonna like saddle him with a kid for a full movie? What's the next movie actually gonna look like? Because it's fun for like this little tease here at the end, but like, by the time Thor 5 rolls around and Hercules is on his back, what are we going to end up seeing there? I'll be very curious to see how that all plays out. But yeah, like all in all, a fun movie, definitely. Just didn't reach the highs that I was that like I think back on and really enjoy of Thor Ragnarok. And so that's like a little disappointing, but still fun, lots of fun to be had in this movie. But I don't know how much I'm gonna like think back on this. Like ultimately, I think it kind of falls in my like in the middle of the road Marvel movies for me. Which nothing wrong with that. Like Marvel has set a high bar for a lot of their stuff. But yeah. We've already talked about the mid and the post credit stuff, so I don't know if there's anything necessarily else to add. Any final thoughts?
Actually, I found it very interesting. You said, yeah, Thor's like Chris Hemsworth's wife and stuff, so I was like, oh, let me take a look at that. He's like, yeah, no. Also, I realized that um, Gore's daughter is literally named Love.
Oh, it like I didn't know, or I didn't like I imagine she's named Love in the credits, but I didn't know if like it's canon that like that's her name or
It's
anything like
canon.
that.
That's her name. She's Love.
Okay.
Which is fun. That's fun. That's why it's Love and Thunder. Like
Yeah.
that's cool. I dig that. And then on top of that, also, it turns out that all of those kids, like the group of kids, was made up of, um, like Hemsworth's, Bale's, Portman's, and Watiti's kids. Like those, like they're that's basically the brood of the actors right there.
Okay. Cool. Oh yeah, we also got like our little montage of stuff happening back at New Asgard at the end with the new, like all the kids being new warriors and stuff like that. Lady Sif teaching Heimdall's kid, and I did like Idris Elba coming back and saying like, "Thank you for watching over my son." That was a nice little like nice little beat for those two. But yeah, again, like ultimately, like great performances all around. I just thought tonally, there's just a lot of like like minor misfires that I think weaken otherwise like strong potential elements of the film. I think it is. Yeah. I think Gore doesn't get enough, despite Christian Bale bringing a lot of cool stuff. Like the moment where he's like, you know, telling the story to the kids and freaking
yes, I was going to bring that up. Going to bring that up. Oh my God, that when that happened, I was like, holy shit, Gore is like the scariest MCU villain.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, when he's like, it's like he's playfully talking to kids, but it's in such a menacing, horrifying way, especially when he's like, oh yeah, you oh, do you like he creates that shadow creature and he goes, oh yeah, oh, well, like speaking of tearing off heads, and he like rips off the head off of it. And it's like, what?
You liked it a minute ago when we were talking about Thanos getting his head chopped off.
Yeah, and then like just like fine, I'll be through with it, and just drops it. And
he throws it as if he's gonna throw it out the cage, but it bounces off the cage and then down to the kids.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's and like they're freaking out as like the head's literally like slithering and bouncing around. And it's like, oh my gosh, Gore is so good. Yeah. And that's the moment I was like, they probably are not going to have enough Gore in this movie.
Yeah,
because I would have loved to see this playful, demonic, devil look like side of Gore. That would have been just so much fun.
Yeah. So yeah, like Christian Bale bringing a lot to that role, and it could have been like, you know, like Marvel continues to have like a villain problem, and so like
this movie does not have a villain problem for the first Marvel property in a long time. It doesn't have a villain problem.
It does though, or like he's really good, but like it still doesn't do nearly as much as it could or should be doing with that villain. Like Christian Bale is bringing his A game to the role, and the movie doesn't serve him in the way I think that it could have or should have. So it for me, it does still have a villain problem of like, this could have been one of the top tier Marvel villains, but the movie doesn't support it enough to warrant that. So we're still stuck with Thanos and Loki as basically being the standouts, and Baron Zemo.
I attest. I do not necessarily agree with that. I attest that I think Gore is up there.
Okay.
Like Gore for me was just that great of a villain, and also just like the Necro Sword, and like you gotta be a badass if you're running around killing all these gods, you know?
I mean, but the problem is like it doesn't show us killing any gods.
I'm aware of that, Trevor. I'm aware that the movie doesn't have a villain problem.
I think the villain is not the problem. It could have been great, but it doesn't do enough. The movie doesn't let him be great.
I think he's great. I think the movie lets him be great, but it doesn't let him be as incredible and great as he could.
Yeah.
I think he still stands out as one of the best MCU villains that we've ever got.
I mean, it helps that we like get a little bit of like pathos for him, but other than that, it's like, eh. But yeah. All right. Any final thoughts then before we wrap up here, Cam?
No, the final thought that kind of came to me was like the carriage scene. I needed to talk about that because it's just such a great moment.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I think that is gonna do it for this episode. Thank you, Cam, for joining me. It was fun to again to do this because usually we get to see these movies together, and so like we have a good like half-hour chat outside the movie theater afterwards, and be like, let's actually save some of this for the podcast. And this time we just got to save all of it for the podcast. Is like
Yep.
even before we started recording, we didn't really talk about each other's thoughts about the movie or anything like that.
And you
So
and I
yeah.
both mentioned that neither of us had tweeted about seeing the movie. So
Yep. All right. Well, that is gonna do it for this episode. Thank you for joining me. Let's go around our metaphorical table with any plugs we might have. You can follow Cameron at Rev Cabot. Anything you want to give a shout out to there, Cam?
yes, I do. I want to give a massive shout out to if you pay attention, you've probably noticed there's a massive amount of efforts being done right now to raise funds for abortion funds or trans kids, anything kind of like really help out those who are in situations in certain states in the United States that are at a very big disadvantage. Keep your eyes out. One of them was Blood for the Blood God or Acts of the Blood Gods, which is raising money for trans kids right now with their gaming marathon that they're doing. By the time you listen to this, I believe it'll be over, but just keep your eyes out for things like that because it's popping up all the time. A lot of people are raising money for stuff like that, and it's super important, especially when you know we're dealing with this is the case in Arizona for another. I think it's another like 80 days. Abortion is still 100% illegal. Uh, the law regarding abortion is from 1902, from before Arizona was a state, and the law that will replace it won't go into effect for another like 80 days. So even in Arizona, there is a critical need for these funds to help these poor people out, to try and handle and deal with this. So anything we can do to anything, if you see stuff going on, that give it your support, whether it's by word of mouth, whether it's by joining the chat and boosting their audience numbers, whether it's just donating money. There are these opportunities everywhere. So that's my shout out that I want.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I have no problem echoing that. Definitely support those causes where you can. A lot of people are hurting right now because of shitty minority rule in this country, and hopefully that actually gets some kind of justice served sooner than later. So yeah, support abortion funds if you can. In particular, I would encourage people to support their like local abortion funds as opposed to Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood gets plenty of money from
They're good.
like any kind of regular donors. So really help out kind of the communities that need it. So yeah, definitely shout out to that and all of those activism causes and stuff out there. You follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site or go to thatnerdysite.com for all the latest from us. If you liked what you heard, once again, please rate, review, like, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Thank you again for listening or watching. Thank you again, Cam, for joining me. Always fun chatting about this stuff. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.